Hey, friend. What's good? What have you been up to? All right. So, a few things to talk about before we get into any of the case file that we're talking about today, because apparently people outside losing their damn mind, but we got some good news on the home front. And then I got something to share with you. But first and first, all right. So my PhD dissertation, all that stuff, right? I have been focused on that. I have been trying to get back into the groove of that. I got ADHD, life be life, and everything in between, but I got some other irons in the fire. And so one of the things that I needed to talk to you about, friend, was that I need to take a bit of a hiatus. I know. Okay. Wait, just wait. Hear me out. Hear me out. I'm not taking a Meg the Stallion hiatus. Okay. I'll be back at the end of October with season two. We're going to start season two. But I do need to take a break. And if I'm telling you to protect your peace, I can't very well not be protecting mine. All right. Now, this, the next thing. Oh, and if you new here, I'm Mika. This is the Side Eye Files or Side Eye Podcast, and this is where I read the files, right? I find those stories, I read the documents, and then I pull up and tell you, my friend, what the hell I have found. So you are officially a part of the Side Eye Society now, and there was no application because this first episode just let you in. This is your first episode. Welcome. Now, friends, stop what you're doing before I forget, okay? Follow the show, subscribe, like this episode, and listen. Y'all always ringing my phone and my line and my inboxes telling me how y'all was chit chatting it up with me throughout the episode. Well, chit chat it up with me in these damn comments, okay? Leave me some comments because I do actually read them. I also do respond to them. And then make sure you go on to Spotify first because that's where this show is actually living. And send the episode to whoever you think would like it or the show in general. Cause we all over the place over here. I heard somebody say, I'm not gonna repeat it. I'm not gonna repeat it. No, friend, I'm not gonna repeat it. But let's get back to what I had to tell you about because today I have been, if y'all haven't noticed, the reason for the hiatus is also because I have been struggling to find time to really record. And that comes because I got a lot of irons in the fire again. But today, particularly, let me tell you, friend, how I was recording this morning to get this out to you so you can have it by lunchtime. And I'm talking, I was up at 6 o'clock. Okay. Realize I have been recording, but I wasn't actually recording. So I had did a full fucking episode, friend, and was not recording. But then came some news later on in the evening. And I was like, that's why I couldn't get it out because it was really good news, friend. Judge John Roach has been officially removed and recused from handling Carmelo Anthony's post-trial proceedings. And before anybody run off and say his conviction got overturned, no, it's not. That ain't what happened. This judge has been recused. They have another hearing tomorrow to see if he's going to go back to trial to get a new trial. But if you don't remember, Carmelo was convicted of murder in June of Austin Metcalf and sentenced to 35 years. His new lawyers are now asking for a new trial, and the judge who handled the trial, the original one, went on television afterwards and agreed that the jury, quote unquote, got it right. He was given post game interviews when the same case can still come back before you. You can't do that because you can't sit there with a straight face and be impartial and decide whether or not there's a problem with the trial when you just publicly said it was handled correctly. So there was no bias there. Be real serious. Now, the defense did ask for the judge to be recused. Visiting Judge Sid Harley, I don't know how to pronounce their last name, but it's Harle, friend, granted the request because the judge's public comment could reasonably raise questions about his impartiality. Now, again, this does not mean that Carmelo will get a new trial that is up for discussion tomorrow. It means that a different judge will hear the request for a new one, and the hearing is scheduled again for tomorrow. So we do not have a new outcome yet. All we know is tonight they got to win, and that's a big win. But we're going to put a pin in it because we are watching it. And I did not preface this, but over here, opinions are like assholes, and everybody got one. And if you got one that's negative about Carmelo Anthony in the case, I don't really care to hear it. I'm gonna be honest. But really, no. Just tread lightly with what you say to me about it. Now, friend, The other thing, I don't know if you've seen it. This is a story coming out of Philadelphia, and I was so intrigued. Eugene Horsch. I'm severely interested, okay? Because police stopped him and allegedly found guns, drugs, and fake DEA credentials, already doing the most, the absolute most, okay? But the woman that was with him reportedly had a fake ID with her photograph on it and the name of Blair Tunzelli, a woman who has been missing since 2023. Now, Blair has not been confirmed dead, but this lady got her name on an ID and it ain't her picture. So the thing about this story is that Eugene may be a serial killer. Maybe. I said maybe. I said maybe. We're not jumping to no guns. He ain't been proven guilty yet. And here is the I don't even know what to call it, the twist in the case, right? Because his daddy was R.C. Horsch. And I don't know if you know who that is, friend, but his daddy is a whole nother category of strange, okay? He wrote sexually violent books, including one presented as a memoir of an empathetic serial killer. And in that book, he claimed he strangled a woman and used chemicals to dispose of her body. Now, investigators buffering, glitching, real time. All right. Now, investigators are actually inside the house looking for chemical containers and looking in hidden spaces. And they have an enormous amount of digital evidence, and the images that the police say appear to show other missing bodies inside the home. Other missing women, excuse me. Bodies have not been recovered. But, friend, we're not going to go that deep into him tonight. All I wanna say is that the police gotta differentiate between what belongs to the father and what belongs to the son, and whether or not they was in cahoots on this serial killing spree that they was on, or if the daddy was doing this by himself and Eugene just kinda got caught up in some other fuck shit. But we're gonna put a pin in that, we're gonna come back to that before the season ends, alright? Or maybe we'll come back to it in season 1. I mean, in season 2, excuse me, because we don't know how long it's gonna take to play out, but it's definitely worth putting a pin in. Now, why we actually here, friend, we are actually here tonight because we are going to New Orleans, March 1995. And tonight we are firmly in Killer Lane. There is a sentence sitting on Antoinette Frank's pre-employment file that says, quote, I do not believe this individual is suitable to be a police officer. A board certified psychiatrist wrote that before this lady ever received a badge, evaluated her, documented the problems, and was like, not fit to be a police officer. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't even put her out there. Now, a little over 2 years later, 3 people were dead inside a Vietnamese restaurant, and one of them was a police officer. 2 of them were 17 year old Quang Vu and his 24-year-old sister Ha Vu. Okay. And the woman who had already been told that she shouldn't be a police officer drove back to the crime scene in a marked patrol car and asked the surviving witnesses what happened. Like she was not standing inside the answer. This story is about a department overlooking some major warning signs, friend. The warning was written down. The paperwork said no. The system found a way to say yes anyway, and 3 families, okay, three families had to pay for that decision. Now, everything tonight I'm giving you is sourced. We already know that. I found it. I read it. Now I'm telling you. Let's go ahead and open this file. All right, friend. So before Antoinette Frank becomes the woman standing inside the Kim On restaurant, we definitely need to talk about who she was before she had this badge, or at least who she said she was. Okay, and I did say who she said she was for a reason. So keep up, because almost immediately her paperwork starts disagreeing with her. She was born in Appaloosa, Louisiana. Appaloosa, Louisiana. Help me learn, because y'all know I feel like I'm from Louisiana. Um, Now she was one of 4 children. She had 3 brothers. Her parents were Adam Frank Sr. and Mary Ann Frank. Now, we cannot get into her birthday without documenting, okay, fights. The Louisiana Supreme Court said March 30th, 1971. Some other accounts say April 30th, 1971. They don't really know what her birthday is, but we're gonna use March because that's the date on the court record, and they didn't come back to contest it. Okay. Now we do need to talk about her childhood, and the jokes absolutely stop here. I'm not gonna do her like that. Um, but most of what we know about the alleged abuse in the Frank home comes from an account developed decades later for her 2023 clemency petition, bitching real time. And yes, friend, I said clemency already upfront. A forensic scientist named Dr. Sarah Dealin evaluated Frank and presented a history of severe childhood trauma. And according to that account, Frank's father was a Vietnam veteran who worked for the telephone company, but he was allegedly physically and emotionally abusive to his family. The VA, aka Veterans Affairs, clinical notes from October 1973 reportedly documents him striking his 2-year-old daughter multiple times. And another entry about 2 weeks later reportedly described escalating threats. Okay. And the later accounts go much further. Frank alleges that her father set booby traps around the house, abused her mother in front of all the children, threatened to kill the family by tampering with the gas lines, and once put the family's car on the railroad tracks, threatening to kill him. She also alleged that he began sexually assaulting her around puberty, that she became pregnant 3 times, and all of those pregnancies ended in termination. Hospital record was reportedly cited as confirmation that pregnancy termination resulted from sexual abuse. Now, according to Dealin's report, Frank's mother eventually escaped with the 3 brothers, and Antoinette was left to remain with her father. They said she was forced. Um, Now, Dealin described her as, quote, the price the rest of the family, she was the price for the rest of the family to escape, essentially. And that's what was reported. And so that is absolutely horrifying. And that's what we're going to feel sorry for her in her childhood stories. Okay. But if that is what happened to her, there is no version of where a child or anybody deserves any part of that. None. Okay. Absolutely none. Now, the same clemency era account says Frank's attempted suicide. She had attempted suicide 3 times beginning in her teens, and that number is not independently confirmed in the material I reviewed. It comes from the same psychological history as the abuse allegations, and that actually matters because none of this was presented to a jury during her original 1995 trial. So when Frank was asked about the abuse during her prison intake after her arrest, she denied the abuse occurred. Now, before anybody gets ahead of me, a person denying abuse does not automatically mean the abuse did not happen. We know people conceal trauma for all kinds of reasons, but a claim developed nearly 30 years later for clemency, it's not an automatic established fact either. Okay, both pieces belong in the story because what we do know is that the VA had documented this. But why these kids was never taken from their man? That's not my monkey, not my show. Okay. So her denial begins early and the partial corroboration, all of it belongs right here. And everything that remains unconfirmed belongs right here too. And I'm not choosing the most emotionally satisfying version and handing it to you as fact. I'm just saying what's here. Now, one former police academy classmate later named Frank's father as regularly dropping her off and picking her up from class, and that their behavior together raised eyebrows because they appeared more like a couple than father and daughter. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the things Frank put on paper herself. She claims she graduated from Opelousas Senior High School in 1989 with a 3.5. There's no records. There are absolutely no records. Again, investigators could not verify it because she refused to allow them to obtain her school records. She was like, "I'm not gonna sign that." So we don't have no records there. That's what I mean by there's no records. We just don't have it. And immediately I was like, why would you not want to release the records? If the diploma is real and the GPA is real and transcript could settle the question in about 30 seconds, you know who I think Cheyenne might have learned from her. Shaya made a learn from her. They might have the same. Let me. I'm not a. I am not a psychologist. Let me mind my business. I study psychology, but I am not a psychologist. All right. Now, later accounts say she did not appear in the school's yearbook from the year she claimed she attended, and a former homeroom teacher also remembered her as making quote no impression, neither good or bad. A teacher does not remember you from years later. It doesn't prove you weren't there. Let's be fair, friend. That's not proof. Just mean that she was memorable, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. We don't know. But friend, I do have questions. I just don't have no answers. Okay. Now, she also claimed, she claimed that she participated in a junior police explorer program connected to the Opelousas Police Department. Neither Opelousas Police nor the St. Landry Parish Sheriff's Office could find any record of her confirming her participation. Notice what I said. I didn't say the program was imaginary. I said the agencies could not verify that she participated in it. Okay. But what can be confirmed is that she did later participate in the New Orleans Police Department Explorer Scout program post 560. And the officer who ran that program, Glenn Tate, remembered her and reportedly recalled no problems. Okay. Through the program, she wrote a letter describing herself as, quote, I perceive myself to be a strong young woman with guts and who is willing to endure any obstacle to become the best law officer I can be. End quote. Now put that sentence in your pocket, friend. Put it on your sticky note. Put it wherever you need it. Okay. We about to reach the part where trained professionals identify obstacles between Frank and police work and wrote them obstacles down and recommended that she not be hired. But somehow she still got exactly what she wanted. Now, before the police department, she worked at Walmart in Opelousas as cashier or counter employee, and she was terminated for what the company called frequent personality conflicts with coworkers and marks not eligible for rehire. She later keep that also in your back pocket. I ain't even gonna talk. Just keep the Walmart in your back pocket because she then later worked at another Walmart in New Orleans. And on her police application, she described herself as an office manager, but her actual manager told investigators she was a pricer, friend. That's not that's a whole different job. You can't take I put prices on merchandise and promote yourself to management on an application to carry a government issue weapon or a state issue weapon, whatever. And what makes it worse is that this is not hidden in some buffering real time in a sealed federal archive, friend. Somebody could have just called Walmart, okay? Hey, did Annette work there? Antoinette work there? I mean, yeah, she did. What she do? She's a person. Oh, was she an office manager? No, background check complete. Okay, that's easy peasy lemon squeezy. But apparently they were too busy. Now, Frank also sporadically enrolled at Delgado Community College. Her mother later testified that Frank was a second year student when she was actually arrested. And that brings us to the family information investigators were looking at while reviewing her background because her brother, Adam Frank Jr., had been placed on probation for 2 counts of simple battery. Words are hard today, friend. Simple bat burglary. He later absconded and a warrant was issued for him in September 92. Another account describes him as wanted for attempted manslaughter instead. So, you know, records don't match cleanly. So I'm not going to combine them and make the story pretend like they do. But what is confirmed is that there was active criminal history involving her brother. And her father had also been arrested in New Orleans in 1981 for battery and illegally discharging a weapon. Charges were eventually dismissed in 1992. And to be clear, a relative's criminal history does not automatically disqualify from somebody from becoming a police officer. That's not why these details matter. They matter because Frank's application, her truthfulness, her judgment, her employment problems, and the information she withheld were all supposed to be evaluated together. That's the purpose of a background investigation. Not to punish somebody for their family. We can't control who our family is. We can only control ourselves. Now, by the time Antoinette Frank reached the psychological evaluation stage, at least one doctor believed that she ain't need to be no police officer, okay? And start saying no. And the files absolutely should have stopped that. So now here we are on the receipts that this entire episode hangs on because I need you to follow the dates with me, friend. This was not one evaluation that somebody accidentally overlooked, okay? There were multiple somebodies that was like, hey, no, not her. No, not her. Now, July 12th, 1992, Antoinette Frank completes two standardized psychological tests as a part of her application to the New Orleans Police Department. The written report rates her poor intolerance, open mindedness, and impulse control. She rated, below average in maturity, stability, and her ability to adjust to organizations. The report also identified problems with authorities, marked assertiveness, and what the evaluator called, quote, a hint of rebelliousness, end quote. Now pause. Poor impulse control, problems with authority, difficult adjusting in organizations, and the organization she's trying to join is the police department, a job where you factually carry a weapon and make split-second decisions, exercise authority over strangers, and are expected to follow a chain of command. These were not random personality test questions, friend. They weren't asking whether she prefers summer or fall. These traits had a direct relationship on the job she wanted. The evaluator recommended that Frank receive a full psychiatric evaluation, and she does. Now, on September 1st, 1992, she is evaluated by a board certified psychiatrist named Dr. Philip Sekura. Sekuria? Something. My bad, homie. Now, this doctor rates her unacceptable or below average in most of the 14 job related categories. 14. Not one concerning score hiding at the bottom of the page. Most of the 14 separate categories. Words are so hard today, friend. Now, what he did do was describe her as, quote, shallow and superficial, end quote. And then he writes the sentence that gives you the beginning of this episode, that I gave you at the beginning of this episode. Okay? Quote, I do not believe this individual is suitable to be a police officer. It was not vague at all. It was not a maybe she needed additional training. It was not hire her, but keep an eye on her. It was absolutely, positively, unequivocally, no, not gonna happen. Don't do it. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200. Don't nothing. Not this one right here. Okay. Now, before somebody hits psychiatric evaluation starts diagnosing this woman, we can't diagnose her because we not a psychiatrist and we not a psychologist. We study psychology, but we are not it. All right. Um, he wasn't saying that she had lost touch with reality. He said that he didn't find any evidence of psychosis. His concerns involved her personality traits and her judgment, her impulse control, her response to authority, and her willingness to tell the truth. And that last one appears to have mattered quite a bit. Now, he later told an investigator with the Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections that a major reason for his unfavorable rating was Frank's misrepresentation of her employment history. Remember Walmart friend? Both times. The office manager when she was really just a pricer. Remember the earlier termination for personality conflicts, right? Here we go again. That little Walmart detail we put in our pocket just walked directly into her psychological evaluation. Because the problem was not simply that she had been fired. The problem was that she was applying to become a police officer and was not truthful with the people evaluating whether or not she should become one. Now, I want you to know that's not the end. Because getting fired from Walmart means you can it's not like the military. It don't mean you can't do nothing else with your life, People get fired, people grow, people move on. But if the psychiatrist deciding whether you should carry a gun and a badge, ask you about your employment history, and you misrepresent that during the evaluation, it's no longer a Walmart problem. It's definitely an integrity problem. So that doctor was like, again, no. Frank was like, I'll accept that answer. So I want a second opinion. And second opinion she got, okay? Because the rule says she could appeal. Now, New Orleans Civil Service Director Mike Doyle later described the general process. If an applicant fails a psychological evaluation, the applicant could hire another doctor and obtain a second evaluation. After that, the city selected doctor will review the information. Doyle said this happens somewhat on a regular basis. A regular basis? How often were police applicants failing psychological evaluations in New Orleans and then coming back with another doctor's yes? This sounds like some type of scam. Scam likely. Now, that brings about more questions with Antoinette because who chose a second doctor? How did she choose a second doctor? Where does the second doctor come from? Was that second doctor Cheyenne? I'm not gonna go there. I'm not. I'm not gonna go there. Who paid for her evaluation? Okay. The file does not answer the questions. It really just moves on to the next date. And that date is October 9th, 1992. Dr. Dennis E. Franklin conducts the second evaluation, and it gets a little interesting here. He identifies similar personality traits, not an entirely different woman, not evidence that the first test belonged to somebody else, similar traits to the first evaluation. But Franklin places greater weight um, on Frank's letters of recommendation that concludes those traits should not disqualify her from police work. Who wrote them letters? Scam likely. No, seriously. Like, who wrote a recommendation letter so persuasive, friend, that it outweighed poor impulse control, problems with authority, employment, dishonesty, and the psychiatrist's written conclusion that she was not suitable for police work? Because I need whoever wrote those letters to help me, help me, help me, okay? Help me understand. Because apparently you could recommend a raccoon for a bank manager position and have a bitch counting money by Monday. All jokes aside, though, friend. All jokes aside, let's keep going. All right. So I can't tell you that somebody intentionally shopped around until they found the answer that they wanted to. I do not have paperwork proving her motive. But what I can tell you is that the first no did not stop the process. The second yes kept it moving. Then January 3rd, not January 3rd, January 93 happens, a month before Frank is hired. She actually disappeared for about a day after meeting with an attorney downtown. She left her father a note that reads, quote, "I was doomed since the day I was born. I hate myself and my life." End quote. Her father reports her missing and she returns the following day. She out here appearing suicidal and then pops up like, "Hey y'all, what y'all out here being upset about?" I don't know if that's what she said, but that's how I imagine in my head because why would you leave that letter in there and just dip out and come back the next day like nothing happened? Anyways, I'm not telling you that writing it made her violent. I am not using a mental health crisis as a shortcut explanation for murder. That would be irresponsible and wrong. But this did happen during the same period in which the department was deciding whether or not to rehire her. Now, was it considered? Was it investigated? Was it even in the file before she was hired? We do not know. The public records did not give an answer for that. But February 7th, 93, New Orleans Police Department hires Antoinette Frank. Hmm. I would go back through all of it again, friend. But you understand where we at. She hired and everything, but before this said she shouldn't have been. If I sound stuck, it's because I am. It's because I truly am. Right? The research does not identify the individual who gave the final approval. So nobody's name is really sitting beside that decision. This has me tripped up. Words are hard. And my tongue is huge. But you trip over your tongue kind of thing. Anyways, now it's really convenient because when nobody owns the choice, everybody gets the point at the process. The process reviewed her, the process approved her, the process hired her, but a process does not put its hands on the pen and be like, yeah, I'll sign off on that one. It's given, you know what? I'm be quiet. So February 28th, 93, 21 days after she's hired, she graduates from the police academy. Some later accounts, that was a very short police academy, but I digress. Now, July 93 was the graduation date on some accounts. Sorry, I just dropped my pen, friend. That's what you was hearing. And if you didn't hear it, mind your business. Keep going. But they identify her badge number as 628. Now, I could not confirm that badge number through the Louisiana Supreme Court's chronological stuff, but That's what I did see, and it's just unconfirmable. It's neither here nor there. It's just information because I wanted to give it to you. But that's to say that now she has a badge. Now, what we do know, friend, that was sitting in her file because NOPD did not hire her during some quiet, well managed golden era of policing. Baby, this police department was an absolute shambles, friend. And I'm not being dramatic, okay? The mayor actually said that himself. In the early 90s, the NOPD was losing roughly 100 officers every year through resignations, firings, and arrests. Yes, arrests. It's not a real like bacon out here. If you know, you know. Um, the department was only replacing about half of the officers that it lost, and on top of that, applicants were required to live in New Orleans Parish, okay, which made that pool smaller. So the department was like, "We need bodies," which is probably realistically how she got through because it needed people in uniforms. It needed patrol cars with people in them. And when an organization is absolutely desperate to fill positions, standards can start looking less like standards and more like suggestions, okay? Now, does staffing pressures prove why Frank was hired? Absolutely not, friend, but it does tell us what kind of environment received her application. A department short on officers had an applicant standing there with two psychological opinions saying one saying no, one saying yes. And then I guess when the other doctor reevaluated it after he got it from the second doctor, he was like, I guess I gotta go with his team, so let's go ahead. But the department needed people and she became one of those people. So now let me show you just how bad things were around that time when Frank Jewett. In 94 alone, two New Orleans police officers were arrested in Davis. He was later convicted of arranging the murder of Kim Groves, a woman who had filed a police brutality complaint against him. He had a complaint that he was abusing somebody. And then he responded by having her killed. This is what the New Orleans Police Department was looking like back there, friend. And now it makes a little bit more sense why her evaluation was like, it's okay, let us slide. Now, December 94, the FBI arrested a group of New Orleans officers on federal drug trafficking charges connected to cocaine protection operations involving Lynn Davis, the very Lynn Davis that just, so he was a whole police officer out here being a whole mob boss. Now, some reports say it was 9 officers, some say 10. Either way, friend, we are not debating the 9 or 10. We just know it was a problem. The department had police protecting cocaine instead of its people. Now, when CBS journalist Mike Wallace described New Orleans, he described it as the number one city in the nation for police brutality and corruption. And when Mark Morial became mayor, he told Times Magazine, listen, I just inherited this police department that was already in shambles. He was like, I don't own this shit. It was given to me like this. That's what he said, Frank. But we not gonna stop right there because the organization itself was already in crisis. There was a real federal case called Williams versus the city of New Orleans. That litigation addressed the department's history of discriminating against black officers in hiring and promotion. A consent decree governed parts of the department's hiring and promotion practices during the 80s, and that is documented. What is not documented is any direct connection between that decree and Antoinette Frank's individual hiring decision. I found no court records, no nothing that she was hired because of affirmative action, right? Um, Now we're going to look at black women who should not have been hired, and um she should have been one of them. She should have absolutely been one of them, right? But we cannot let her blackness be the explanation as to why she wasn't hired. It ain't got nothing to do with the two. But the paperwork definitely gives us plenty to criticize without making a racial hiring theory, and the evidence does not support it. But she did receive an unfavorable evaluation. She requested a second opinion, and the second doctor approved her, right? We gotta stick with the facts and make it make sense. Have it make sense for you. It's been a while since I said that. Ooh, a real while since I said that. Anyways, now a few months after the Kim On murders, The United States Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation into New Orleans PD, and I'm jumping ahead here, friends, so stick with me. I'm gonna get to it. But they began the investigation in June of '95 and closed it in 2004 without producing a consent decree from that particular review. Notice the date, '95. Okay, that investigation was opened after the murders, so it cannot be used to explain why Frank was hired in '93. And it gives us more evidence that the police department's broader problems, but no federal report I found identifies the specific person who approved Frank. Again, I just want to be clear because I was really trying to figure out who the fuck put their name, they John Hancock on her paperwork that was like, yeah, let's go ahead and hire her. Now, after graduating from the academy, she was assigned to the 7th Police District for approximately 6 to 8 months, and she had a partner, which is usually like they field officer. And then she was placed in a one officer patrol car, which meant that she was by herself and no longer with a field officer because her field officer signed off and was like, yeah, she ready to go outside and be by herself, you know? We walked through impulse control, difficulty with authority, problems adjusting to organizations, dishonesty during the evaluation, and psychiatric evaluation that said she was not suitable for work. And 6 to 8 months later, she was outside patrolling New Orleans. Oh, yeah. Does nobody monitor these? Were they not monitoring her a little bit more closely because of the way she was evaluated? They was just like, "Now she good." It don't matter. It don't matter. But 1994, she received Officer of the Month based on her arrest productivity, and Captain John Landry later testified about the award during the penalty phase of her trial and said on paper she was productive. She was making arrests. She had an award, but one later account says her patrol supervisor and other officers a lousy cop. Now, which one was it? Was she effective or was she just making? Because activity and competence are not the same. You can be busy as hell and still be bad at your job. We all know that. Now, the description does not give us enough detail to know if people just didn't like her or what their work relationship was for real, for real. But she also worked as an off-duty security officer, security patrol at Dillard's department store in '94, September specifically. The second job continued until her arrest. Now, mind you, she was able to still be a security officer after she was arrested. Off-duty security work is definitely common for police officers. Businesses wanted a person with a badge and a gun, and officers needed extra money. So that's what she was doing. She was like, "Imma go do security at Dillard's." But there was also a small Vietnamese restaurant on Bullard in New Orleans, and the restaurant was called Kim On. And there was another New Orleans police officer that entered this store, and his name was Ronald Williams, but everybody called him Ronnie. Now, Ronnie, Ronald Austin Williams II, was 25 years old. He had been an NLPD officer since '91, was married, and he had just had his second baby, Patrick. Patrick was born about 10 days before the murders. So when Ronnie left home to work that security shift, there was a newborn baby waiting for his father to come back, okay? Frank and Williams were not officially assigned as partners, but they occasionally rode together and were considered friends. Some friends she was. Now, one local account says they worked the same shift and platoon nearly every day for more than a year. I don't know if they call it platoons, but that's what I guess that's what the paperwork says. I guess platoon it is. But outside of their regular police work, Ronnie picks up extra money providing security at the Kim On restaurant. So if Ronnie was sick or tired, he would sometimes have Frank cover the shift for him. In her own statement after the murder, she said she would also go to the restaurant simply to spend time with him. Now I don't know exactly what that means and spend some time with him because he had a newborn baby or what kind of time they were spending. But I don't know. The record does not clearly tell what a relationship was, just that she wanted to spend more time with him. What it does tell us is that Frank knew Ronnie, knew the restaurant, knew the family, knew the security arrangement, and knew how that business operated after closing. Put that on your sticky note frame. Homicide detective Eddie Rance developed the theory that money from those off duty shifts may have created some tension between the two of them. According to Rance, Frank believed Ronnie had been shortchanging her on either at the hours she worked or the money she owed. That was the detective's working theory. It was not established as a proven motive at trial, so we can't say it was fake. But if Frank believed Ronnie was playing with her money, it definitely gives us one possible reason why she might have been mad at him. And friend, you already know how I feel about motives that ride tied in a little boat. People can have more than one reason for doing something. Money, resentment, opportunity, keeping, quiet is kept. And knowing where the cash was kept, knowing when the restaurant closed, knowing who would still be inside, one motive does not cancel out all the others. But we're gonna keep Red's theory where it belongs and file attributed to him. And we're gonna keep it moving. The next person in this story is Roger LeCaze. He was 18 years old when the murders happened, and the story of how he and Antoinette Frank met, friend, it's already confused before the relationship began, okay? November 25th, 1994, Frank responded to or became involved in the investigation of a shooting. LaCaze had been injured. His friend Nehemiah Miller was killed. LaCaze's mother, Alice Cheney, told investigators that the shooter was a man named Freaky D. I said Freaky D, friend. That's what I said. Now, his mother also told them that he ain't get my words together. That shooting was connected to a drug deal. And a Department of Corrections investigator later believed that this shooting investigation was the first time Frank and LaCaze met, not mate, because they do eventually meet. Anyways, Frank later claimed that they had known each other for approximately 8 months before the murder. And that will place their first meeting months before the November shooting. So did they meet when she investigated the shooting, or did they already know each other and the shooting just simply gave them a reason to be closer, or was she already involved in the shooting? I got questions, but they were not resolved. Now, LaCaze eventually drops out of high school, and his IQ was actually measured in the low 70s, friend. Now, friend, none of that makes him incapable of making choices, and none of it actually makes him responsible for what happened before we get to the evidence. But I want you to note what his IQ is. Remember, low 70s, okay? But it does give us important context for the relationship that developed between the 18-year-old with the unstable life and the 23-year-old police officer with the badge, a salary, a patrol car, and access. If they digits end in teen, you should not be messing with them. So then, what does that say? Soapbox again. Now, after the November shooting, the boundaries between LaCaze and Frank went straight to hell, friend. Because according to LaCaze, Frank became obsessed with him. Obsessed. Visited him regularly, buying him clothes, a pager, a cell phone, rented him a Cadillac, and allowed him to drive her police car. Friend, the clothes are her business. The pager is her business. The phone and the Cadillac are her business. But that there that can't even get it out right. That there can't get it out right. That their patrol car belonged to the city of New Orleans, okay? Because how is an 18-year-old civilian with a history of drug dealing driving a marked police vehicle? And where was everybody else? Because other officers reportedly saw him driving it. He was observed moving Frank's police unit to at an accident scene. Was like, hey, yo, go move that over here for me. Why would you let him in your patrol car? Why would you let anyways, nobody was like, who that little boy behind the wheel of Frank's patrol car? They weren't like, let me call a supervisor, nothing, okay? Nothing. And this what I mean. When I said the warning signs were not hiding, people saw pieces of this relationship in real time. The problem is that nobody seemed to put these together until three people were dead. Now, Frank introduced LaCaze to different people using different descriptions. Sometimes he was her nephew, and sometimes he was her trainee. Now, trainee for what? We don't know. What training program? We don't know. Who was supervising it? We don't know. We do know we got a department that'll accept anybody's application, but we don't know that he had an application in for nothing. She just created a position and started onboarding him, okay, in the passenger seat of her patrol car. Now, why the change depending on, who's asking about their relationship? If he was simply somebody she was helping, why not just say that? Why go from nephew here and trainee over there? Those make him sound legitimate and gave him a reason to be next to her. They gave people a reason not to question why this young man was constantly with the police, knowing that he be dealing drugs, allegedly. Now, whether she consciously planned it that way or not, those explanations created cover. Some later accounts describe Frank and LaCaze as being in love and having a sexual relationship, and Frank definitely denied that characterization. She told police she's only trying to help him, so I'm not handing madly in love to you as an established fact. What is established is the conduct, the visits, the gifts, the rental car, the patrol car, the changing explanation for who he was. Frank got to make sense out of it, make sense for you, okay? But February 4th, this is the warning, okay? 1 month before the Kim On murders at the restaurant, Frank is on duty in uniform and LaCaze is with her. They become involved in a violent confrontation with two men, John Stevens and Anthony Wallace. After a party, LaCaze produces a weapon. A fight begins and gunfire goes off. The civil sheriff's deputy named Irvin Brand witnessed part of the confrontation, and according to Brand, he was like, Frank defended LaCaze and described him as, quote, the good guy, end quote. Frank then had Wallace arrested for attempted murder and armed robbery. The charges were later dropped. But here's the part that didn't sit right, because Brand testified that Frank did not draw her own weapon, even when Wallace allegedly pointed a gun at her or LaCaze. A police officer is standing there. A gun is allegedly being pointed at her, and she don't draw her gun. But she immediately knows which man is the good guy and uses her police authority to arrest the other one. How does she know? What has she seen before Brian arrived? Or was she acting as a police officer evaluating the scene? Or was she just protecting the case? Because, and mind you, she showed up after the fact. These guns was already out. Well, one gun anyways. But anyways, the court later allowed this incident to be presented during Frank's trial as evidence of another criminal conduct. And they found the evidence of her participation clear and convincing enough for a jury to hear it. So this was not merely neighborhood gossip. Added years later, the incident entered the legal record, and still Frank remained on patrol. Now, I need the side eye society to go ahead and answer something, because at what point should somebody be inside NOLA PD intervening when LaCaze was driving her patrol car, when all other officers told him doing it, when Frank introduced this civilian as a trainee and there was no evidence to point to any of it? Now, when that gun went off during the incident that involved the two of them, because at what point was y'all like, where's the paperwork for this child? Why is this child always riding with you? Why is this 18-year? Was he doing like, did he fill out ride along paperwork every day? I had questions and nobody had the answers, okay? Nobody had the answers. Now, about 1 or 2 weeks before the murders, Frank reported that her personal 9 mil Beretta had been stolen, okay? Which usually a Beretta is an issue service weapon, but, I mean, she might have had a 9 mil of her own. That's what she said. But LaCaze later was like, "No, that was false." Now, according to him, the gun was never stolen. But why would she falsely report her own firearm missing? I'm not gonna answer that yet. Just put a question mark beside everything else, okay? March 3rd, 1995, days before the murder, Frank is on duty and in uniform, and she starts at the Walmart with LaCaze because he is with her through quite a fucking bit. They purchased 9 mil ammo. Frank, go back. Remember? Her 9 mil was supposedly stolen. Now she in Walmart purchasing ammo for a 9 mil. She get ammo issued with her service weapon, so it ain't for that one. What gun is this for? Who was gonna use it? And if her Beretta was not actually stolen, where was it? Where is it? Now, one separate account claims that the murder weapon had been taken from the NOPD evidence room. I cannot confirm that through claims. So what we're not gonna do is combine it with LaCaze's statement and pretend that we have a complete chain of custody, because we do not. What we have is a dirty paper trail. A police officer reports her firearm stolen, and her companion later says that report was false. The two of them purchasing matching ammunition the day before. matching because it like the day before 3 people are killed, okay? That is enough documented foolishness and riffraff shenaniganry without me adding nothing to it, all right? Now, we gonna meet the people inside the restaurant, not just the victims, the family, okay? Kim Un was a Vietnamese restaurant located on Bullitt Avenue in New Orleans East. It was founded by a married couple, Nguyen Nguyen and Vic Vu. I don't really know if that's how they pronounce their name, so I apologize if I'm butchering it. Now, the husband immigrated to the United States in 1981, and the wife and children followed 10 years later in 1991. And they were building a life, a business, and something they family could work together. I don't know why this now in this moment made me want some pho, but I want some pho. I'm finna go get some pho after this, friend. But back to the story. So Ha Bu was one of their children. They had 4 children in the restaurant that was working with them. So Ha Vu was 24 and or in some later accounts incorrectly and consistently listed her as 21. So she was between 20 and 25, right? Chow Vu was 23. Quoc Vu was 18, in some accounts placing him closer to 19. And Quang Vu was 17. Okay. That's the family. And they also had a 45-year-old waitress named Vui Vu, who also identified in some accounts as 2, and she worked there as well. Han was reportedly considering becoming a Catholic nun. Kwang was an altar boy at St. Brigade Catholic Church, and he played high school football and reportedly wanted to become a priest. 17 years old, deciding what their life would become. Ronnie Williams was working that night as security. Frank had covered some security shifts there before, so the family did know her, they recognized her, and they allowed her inside the business. So she was not a stranger casing a restaurant from across the street. She knew these people, she knew the layout, and she knew the routine. Um, Now, according to surviving witnesses, by the time Antoinette Frank entered Kim on for the 3rd time on the morning of March 4th, she had a key. How she had a key, where she got the key from, don't know how, okay? But before I start the clock on March 1st, 1995, I need to warn you about the clock. The public timeline has a problem. Some accounts place Frank at Lakay's 3rd arrival at Kim On's, excuse me, approximately 1:55 or 2 a.m. But other reports place uh, the one of the family members calls to a friend at approximately 1:48, and Kwok called 911 at approximately 1:50. These calls happened after the shooting, so both sets of times can't be exact. Imma pretend like the clock makes sense, and we're gonna keep on moving and hope nobody notices, but you are the side-eye society, so of course you would have noticed, so I had to give you all the details, okay? But we're gonna move on, and we gonna skip over it. Um, so I'm going to give you the sequence of events, which is actually consistent across the major accounts, and when I give you one of the disputed minute marks, understand the order is stronger than the reported time. So somebody's clock is wrong, and I can't tell you whose. The first visit happened around 9 p.m. on March 3rd, 1995, while Frank was still working her actual police shift. You know, the job she had, the patrol car she was actually driving, factually riding around in with somebody as her trainee nephew. She calls the Kim On restaurant from the 7th District Station and asked whether they needed her to work security that night. And they was like, nah, we don't need you. Ronnie already here. That should have been the end of it. She asked whether they needed security. They already had somebody question answered. Okay. But at approximately 11 p.m., her shift ends. She picks up LaCays and the two of them drive to Kim On in Frank's personal car, a 1977 Ford Torino. Now on the front friend, this is it's fucking ghetto, okay? Because on the dashboard is a homemade cardboard sign that reads New Orleans police officer on duty. And why does the actual police officer need to make herself a cardboard sign announcing that she's a police officer? She got identification, a uniform, and a badge. But she's off duty in her personal car with an 18-year-old civilian beside her. And she needs anybody looking at the car to believe that she was in an official capacity. And I gotta wonder, like, what was going on in her mind. And it was like, let me put a cardboard box up here. Because who was the sign for? The restaurant employees at this time of night? Anybody walking through the parking lot? Like, anybody that was another police officer walking past being like, why she here? I can't prove what her purpose was or what she intended it to serve, but I know she made it before the crime, and I know she placed it where people could see it. Put that beside everything else. Now, during this first visit, Frank and Lacaze ordered drinks. Frank introduces Lacaze as her nephew. She says they are on their way to see a movie. The restaurant is slow that night, so the family decided to close early. And before leaving, the dad of the restaurant leaves approximately $10,000 in cash on the table. This seems to be the motive. The money was not the restaurant profit waiting to be divided, friend. It was being used for plumbing repairs and the expansion of the parking lot. They was intending to put that money back into the business. Now, why they left it out on the table, nobody knows. Okay, I guess they felt safe because they had their police officers there. 6 people remained inside. Ronnie, the security guard that was the police officer. He was moonlighting as security guard. Havu, Chavu, Kwakvu, and Kwangvu, and the waitress Vuvu or T. Now, around 12:15 a.m., Frank calls the restaurant again. This time she orders some food. Then she and McKay's return. Same police officer, same young man, same restaurant, same visit. Second visit, excuse me. Frank introduces LaCaze again as her nephew. Why you keep introducing him as your nephew? You already told them about him, okay? The staff notices some things about him. He is short, has a gold grill, and he's carrying a cell phone. Still something noticeable in 95 for witnesses to remember, okay? Now, Frank and LaCaze sit down to eat, but they leave without finishing their food. And during the visit, Frank allegedly takes the key to the restaurant's front door without nobody noticing. That's how she got the key. That makes sense now. I forgot. Now, she already called twice. She already arrived twice. She already had established a reason for herself and LaCaze to be seen together inside that restaurant. And she now had a key nobody knowingly gave her. And this is something that it I don't even got it, okay? She not losing control. She These are steps. She is making her mark. Call, visit, leave, call again, return, take the key, leave again. And I need to know when they learned about the $10,000. I could not figure that out. Because did Frank already know the family was keeping the money there? Did she see it during one of the first visit? Was that it? Was the robbery planned before they got there, or did they get there the first time, seen the money, and then was like, "Alright, we gonna leave, and we gonna do this, and we gonna do it again. We gonna go back, and we gonna case it out a little bit more, see what's left." Right? But it didn't make sense because the K's later reported that they had been planning the robbery for about a week. Now, if that account is true, these visits were not casual, they were preparation. Again, late that night, though, Frank pulls the car into the parking lot for a third time. Child sees it. Cow sees it. Child sees it. And something about that third arrival felt off, okay? When I say trust your spirit and your discernment, baby, Ronnie had reportedly warned Char earlier that he did not trust Frank. According to the later accounts, he tolerated her presence because other officers were not always available to cover the restaurant security details. But what did he not trust? Her judgment? Her relationship with Lacaze? Or did he just have a good feeling about her and be like, I don't like the way she moved, but he disregarded it anyways? Now, Ronnie knew her as a fellow officer, and if a police officer tell you he did not trust another police officer, I need the rest of that sentence. I need to know why, okay? And I never get it, friend. You never gonna get it. I'm never gonna get it. We just don't got it. But Cal sees the Frank's car and moves the $10,000. Like, I'm gonna go ahead and put this somewhere. She takes that cash off the table and hides it inside the microwave. And then she brings Quack and Boo toward the kitchen. The front door is locked, but Frank got a key. Remember, she used the key she allegedly took during the second visit and lets herself inside. Ronnie stands, asks her where she got the key. She don't answer. Okay? She pushes past him, shoves Cal, Quack, and Boo toward the kitchen and says she needs to speak with Cal. And while Ronnie's back is turned, LaCaze shoots him. Accounts differ on whether LaCaze fired 2 or 3 times, but he definitely shot Ronnie. Um, and he shot him in the back of the neck, severing his spinal cord, and he was immediately paralyzed. Now, another shot strikes him in the back while he lies on the floor. LaCaze takes Ronnie's service weapon and his wallet. Hal gets Quack and Vu into the restaurant's walk-in closet, and she closes the door, turns off the lights, and through a small glass window, the three of them watch from the dark. Ha and Kwong did not make it into the cooler. Frank and LaCaze cornered them, and they forced the brother and the sister to their knees and demand to know where the money is. Now, the account disagrees about the amount of shots. One describes it as 9, and another says the witnesses heard a series of shots that may have brought the total closer to 10. The trial evidence established that Frank shot Ha and Kwong was shot multiple times. Descriptions of his wounds vary, but they include injuries to his head, chest, abdomen, and limbs. He was also struck with a gun. Now, some accounts state that Frank fired additional shots because Kwong was still alive and moaning, and he was shot while kneeling, um, and died where they or Ha was shot while kneeling. I'm sorry, and she died where she fell with her forehead resting on the floor. 17-year-old Kwong and 24-year-old Ha, and 25-year-old Ronald Williams' husband and new father. Okay, this was not $10,000 disappearing from a restaurant. 3 people were killed over money that Frank and LaCaze did not even find because before, Hal had already moved it. After the shooting, Frank and LaCaze searched for Crown Quack. Okay, they didn't find him. And according to LaCaze's later account, Frank says as they leave, one of the bitches got away, quote unquote. His account, okay, his allegation. But if she said it, listen to what that sentence means. She was counting survivors, not asking whether anybody needed help, not panicking over what just happened. She was calm as a fiddle, okay? Are fiddles calm? I guess. I don't know. Frank ends up driving LaCaze away from the restaurant and drops him near his apartment. And when a call comes over the police radio reporting an officer down at Kim On, now this is where the audacity level reaches something I'm not sure we have adequately named. Frank does not call the police and report that LaCage just forced her to shoot 2 people. She does not drive to the nearest officer and surrender. She don't tell dispatch. She know who shot Ronnie. She goes to the 7th district station, gets the keys to a marked patrol car, and drives back to Kim in a marked patrol car. Leaves the scene in her personal vehicle after she shot 3 people. Changes cars and returns looking like the police. I I don't even know why. Now, homicide sergeant Eddie Rance later gave his opinion, quote, "There's no doubt in my mind she went back there to kill the rest of them." End quote. That was Rance's conclusion. I believe that's probably what it was as well. But it was not a separate crime proved against her in court. And so we don't actually know why she returned. I can suspect it. I got a lot of theories. Because what if she had like split personality disorder? What if she went in there was I don't know. I can't even say split personality disorder, because what would make you shoot somebody and then be like, "Let me go back to work and grab this car and go back and act like I'm investigating this thing." Was you really trying to go back and kill these people, or was you gonna act like I don't know? You know what? Let's keep moving. Now, we know that she returns. We know that she entered through the back door, and we know that the rear screen door was later found locked from the inside. That locked door directly contradicted Frank's later claims that she had helped employees escape through it. Okay? Can't escape through a locked door. Now, inside the cooler, Cal, who's still there and alive, tries to call 911, and those attempts fail. One account says she couldn't get a signal. Yeah, because you in a cooler, girl. And she probably had T-Mobile, AT&T, you know. I laugh and I joke about it, but I have I understand the struggle of not having no battery, okay? But the, other things say that the battery may have actually been her problem, okay? But she eventually reaches a friend and says the police officer was killed, and that call is reportedly, um, taking place at approximately 1:48 AM. Although, as I told you at the beginning, the timestamp conflicts with the reported time of Frank's 3rd arrival, but Quack escapes through the back door and runs to a friend's house, and he calls 911, and that call is at approximately 1:50 AM. Now, Quat tells the dispatcher that a New Orleans police officer named Antoinette and a man had shot people in the restaurant. Not an unknown woman, not somebody dressed like an officer, but an actual officer named Antoinette. Okay. Responding officers arrive within minutes. And Cal comes out of the restaurant and runs into the arms of Officer Eval. Okay. And Antoinette Frank is already there just for the role she decided to play next, responding officer, okay? Frank asked Kyle what happened. Asked him what happened, and then was like, I can't make it make sense. Like, you asked the woman that just watched you from the cooler do everything you did. What happened? Kyle responded, "You were there. You know everything. Why would you ask me that question?" And when Officer Fogg asked Kyle who committed the murders, Kyle identified Antoinette and describes a short black man with gold teeth, okay, and directly then points at Frank, okay? Another contemporary account quotes Kyle telling her, "You saw what happened. You killed my brother and sister." So that has not been confirmed factually, okay? But that's definitely, you pull up and it's like, what happened? How we get here? What the fuck you mean how we get here, bitch? You did this. Now, what did Frank think was gonna happen when she went back there in this police car? Did she think everybody in that cooler was dead? Did she think the uniform would confuse them? What did she think? Okay. Did she believe that her badge would carry more weight than a traumatized Vietnamese woman's eyewitness account? Because returning to the scene is one thing, but standing in front of the person and pretending to investigate what this person just watched you do is a new level of confidence that had to come from somewhere, okay? Because the audacity, the audacity, okay? So Detective Eddie Rance and his partner Marco uh, Dima initially treat Frank as a fellow officer and a witness, but her explanation starts creating more questions than answers. Frank claims she drove all the way to the station to report the shooting, but she had a police radio. She had access to a cellular phone. And according to her story, she had left the injured officer and endangered civilians behind. Why would you drive away? Why not call for help immediately? Why did you go back and change vehicles? Why return through the back door when you could come through the front? Frank claims she led the employees out through the rear screen door, but investigators was like, nah, that door was locked from the inside. So how you do that? Frank then implicates LaCaze. During a pat down, officers found a 38 caliber revolver tucked into her waistband, even though she had claimed she was unarmed. Her police radio was later found underneath the front seat of her personal car at the station. And she gives a recorded statement and admits to shooting these people. But she claims LaCaze forced her to do it by holding Ronnie's service weapon to her head. She says LaCaze shot Ronnie, which is factual. But now ballistics reports show that the same 9 millimeter fired the fatal shots at all three victims. The evidence connects one gun to all three, so it does not by itself tell us whose finger pulled the trigger every single time that weapon was fired, okay? We have contradicting stuff. Now, the determination that Frank shot Ha and Kwon came from a full body of trail evidence, including her own statement. Ballistics was one of the cases, okay? Now, LaCaze tells a different version. In one account, he admits to entering the restaurant with a gun but denies shooting anyone. He blamed Frank for everything. He was like, I ain't doing shit. Now, other accounts attributed to his brother's statement to police, LaCaze admits to shooting Ronnie, but says Frank killed Hot and Quan. That same account says the robbery had been planned for exactly 1 week. Now, both of them agree that they were there. Both of them agree that Frank shot Ha and Kwong. But when it came to Ronnie, they was pointing at each other because who ain't finna go down for the killing of a cop was one of them, is what they were saying. Now, police arrest LaCaze later at that same apartment in Grenada. And approximately 45 minutes after the murder, Ronnie Williams' stolen credit card had been used to buy about $15 worth of gas just a few blocks from that apartment. First of all, you got to be the dumbest kind of criminal to take this man's credit card and go buy some damn gas with it after you done shot him and killed him and left him and two other people there for dead and two other people in the freezer not knowing they gonna make it out. Oh my gosh, okay? $15? $15. You didn't have $15 in your I guess not, because that's why you was at the place trying to rob them. I digress off my soapbox for him. Now, before the night is over, somebody at that gas station using his card again, because that's what he's doing. That one transaction helped place Ronnie's stolen property near LaCaz almost immediately after the killings. Okay. Now, LaCase's brother initially tried to give him an alibi. That's my bro. I'm not gonna let him be out here. Nah, he's with me. Nah, no, he wasn't. He wasn't here. I I don't know. I don't know how I might respond, friend. But listen, somehow the owner of the billiard hall contradicts that account. So then that starts to fall apart because he was like, "Yeah, we was there playing pool," and that man was like, "No, they wasn't. I ain't seen these. I ain't seen neither one of their ass." Okay. Ronnie ended up being buried March 7th, 1995 at Lake Tyree Cemetery, and his name was later added to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. Take a sip of water, Frank, because I need one too. That was a big gulp. Goodness gracious, I was thirsty. But anyways, at this point, his second child is not even 2 weeks old. His family buried, or Haas family, excuse me, buried their daughter and their son. All right. And Antoinette Frank, the officer that two psychiatrists, well, one psychiatrist really was like, she should have never had this badge, is now accused of using that badge, her knowledge and her trust it created to help get herself and LaCase through the door. Okay. So now we go on to the trial and the verdict. On April 28th, 1995, a grand jury indicted her and LaCaze on 3 counts of first-degree murder each. They were tried separately, and LaCaze went first. So his trial began July 17th, 1995, and despite his attorney reportedly advising him not to, Rogers took the stand in his own defense. Now, friend, sometimes your lawyer tell you to sit there, straighten your face, and let the person with the law degree do all the talking. Like, let that man fuck the horse and you hold the tail, okay? That's his job. They know what they doing. This was one of them times. He should have been listening. He should have been listening. He should have listened to his lawyer. He should have shut up and fucking color. But that's how he got in the situation in the first place because he didn't shut up and fucking color. Now, once the prosecutor started cross-examining him, friend, a New Orleans magazine described Rogers as blubbering. That man started talking, okay? Would shut the fuck up. His position was that he had not pulled the trigger and didn't even know these people. But the prosecutor had witnesses placing him with Antoinette, ballistics tying his gun that he had to the murders, and the gas receipt showing he was the one that purchased gasoline in eastern New Orleans after the shootings. The jury deliberated on July 21st. 79 minutes later, they returned with guilty verdicts on all three, okay? Unanimously was like, he need to die. He get the death penalty. Excuse me. So by the time Antoinette's trial came around in September, New Orleans had already spent months hearing about this case. And I do mean everybody heard about it. Out of 113 prospective jurors questioned, 110 already had been exposed to news coverage. So like 77 prospective jurors had been excused for cause, okay? Now, the defense asked for the trial to be moved outside of New Orleans. Judge, judge, but for real time, hey, Judge Frank Marula denied the request. He was like, it's gonna stay right here. Now, does widespread publicity automatically mean the verdict was wrong? Absolutely not. The evidence against Antoinette was substantial. Excuse me. And I'm not gonna sit here and act like it was not, because we all heard what I was reading. She did it. But when almost every person you bring in has already heard the story and more than a third are openly telling you that they've already formed an opinion, it is fair to ask whether finding a truly untouched jury in that city was even possible. Both things can be true at the same time. So Annette's trial began on September 5th, 1995, friend, and prosecution was led by Glenn Woods and Elizabeth Teal. That trial moved, okay? The state presented surviving witnesses from Kim on, the physical evidence, the ballistics, the testimonies connecting Ann and Rogers to the crime. They had Antoinette's own behavior after the murder, her arrival back at the restaurant in her patrol car after going back to the station with her personal vehicle, leaving her weapon in the personal vehicle back at the station. Not the smartest. Not the smartest, not the smartest, not the brightest light bulb out there. Oh, Lord. Take a sip of your water, friend. Now, her questioning the 2 that remained alive as if she were responding to a scene she had not just helped to create or even orchestrate. Listen, the weapon found in an apartment, they had everything. They had everything. And the statement she eventually gave to investigators, admitting that she had actually shot Ronnie Williams, even if you set aside the disputed pieces, the state was not standing there empty-handed, not even close. But friend, this why I need you to go ahead and pull your chair up and in, okay? Because the defense's response is one of the strangest parts of the whole trial. Her attorneys had subpoenaed nearly 40 witnesses. 40 witnesses from where? With eyewitness testimony. What you know what? Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Oh man. All right. So out of the 40 people they subpoenaed, do you know how many of those people they actually called during the guilt phase? Not a one. Okay. Friend, you put 40 names on a subpoena and then you ain't pulled nobody up to the chair? Absolutely none. The defense was like, I ain't got no witnesses and I ain't got no evidence during the guilt phase. Antoinette didn't testify. Now, just because the defendant has a right not to take the stand, her silence cannot legally be treated as proof of guilt, okay? We don't know that. She just got the right not to say nothing. But the defense strategy, I have a whole lot of questions because was calling no one the strategy from the beginning? Did something fall apart during the trial? Like, what happened? Did the attorneys believe that the prosecution had failed to prove his case and decided not to risk opening up any additional doors? Because, baby, the prosecutor did not lack in evidence at all. Okay? Or did you just knew you simply because I ain't gonna go there. Mm-mm. Now, this is one of those places where I'm not filling in the blanks with anything to sound dramatic. I can only tell you what that nearly 40 people were subpoenaed friend. None of them testified during their guilt phase, and later appeals will put a very bright spotlight on the quality of Antoinette's representation. I'm gonna put a pin in that and come back to it, okay? Now, closing arguments for her ended September 12th, 1995, and the jury went to deliberate. Baby, they came back in 22 minutes, okay? 22 minutes guilty of murder of Ronnie, Howe, and Kwong, okay? 22 minutes. Friend, it take me longer than that to decide what I want in my online cart. So 22 minutes is very decisive. I it's they knew without a shadow of a doubt. Okay, everybody was in agreement. Everybody was in agreement. Take a drink, friend. You need some water. Now, this jury decided that 3 first-degree murder charges before somebody could finish lunch is is absolutely crazy, okay? Contemporary reporting described it as the fastest verdict in New Orleans for a capital murder trial at that time. And again, the speed of the verdict does not itself prove that the verdict was unfair. Sometimes a jury believes the evidence is overwhelming and does not need hours to discuss it. Now, the trial then moves to the penalty phase where the jury had to decide between life imprisonment and death. This time, the defense did call witnesses, and that really does matter. They called no witnesses while the jury was deciding on what they was gonna do and how they was gonna be like, hey, you guilty or not, right? Now, but they did present people to the jury while deciding whether or not she should live. Excuse me, friend. Irvin Bryan Jr., the man involved in that February incident with the gun, remember the one that was at the shooting with the first dude? Um, I think his name was Wallace. Where's look like Wallace. That one. Yep. Captain John Landry testified that Antoinette had once been selected as Officer of the Month. Remember back way when she was selected for Officer of the Month because she had the most arrests for her great auntie, Mabel, Mabel Jenny's best I could do. It looks like Jenny's, but her great auntie spoke for her, and so did her grandmother. Hannah Ann Adams and her mother, Mary Frank, okay? Family described her the way they knew her before all of this. A young woman who made good grades, was not a troublemaker, who had attended Delgado Community College, reaching her second year. They asked the jury to see more than that uniform, arrest photos, and the crimes in front of them. If you want to see a picture of her, it's on my Instagram, by the way. And um, noticing as these people are talking, trying to help the jury, sway the jury one way or another on life or death, ain't nobody talk about her mental health, okay? There was no mental health expert, no psychologist, no psychiatrist explaining the evaluations that are warned that she might not be suitable for police work before she was ever hired. Nobody talking the jury through her history and her behaviors. Her family could tell the jury that they loved her. They could tell them who she was as a child. They were not trained mitigation experts, and they could not explain the psychological evidence that was already sitting in this woman's history. That omission will become a major issue later, friend. And listen, I know we are well over the usual 35, 40-ish minutes I be giving you on a normal day, but this is required. So sit back and just relax. We almost done. I know. Um, so the prosecution was arguing that the murders qualified for the death penalty for him because they occurred during the robbery. More than one person had been placed at risk, and because Ronnie Williams was a peace officer engaged in his lawful duties, then the victim family spoke. Okay. Ronnie's widow, Mary Williams, told the jury that the man her husband had been, he was a good man, Savannah. And what sorry, they it's what popped into my mind, friend. My bad. I'm be serious. This is sorry about this lady and her husband. He's dead. And she was really sad about that and talking about how his death had taken him from their family. And they at that time, still newborn kind of baby. The wife of the store owner spoke through an interpreter about losing both her children, two of her children, because not both of them. Two of her children, the the hopes and dreams that her children had, she said, had been taken from there. And this is where we really go put all the jokes down because behind all the courtroom strategies and the bizarre shenanigans, every question we still have about how Antoinette ever became a police officer, like it's still sitting in that room. Okay. There are families sitting in the room without the people that they came in loving. And I understand Ronnie was gone, Hobb was gone, Kong was gone. There was no verdict that could return any of them. So the jury sentencing deliberations were also brief. Contemporary reports say they deliberated for about 35 minutes, okay, before being like, yep, she needs to go ahead and dust to dust, ashes to ashes on all three murders, okay? Now, later accounts will put it closer to 45, but either way, this was not the jury wrestling a decision overnight. They had made up their minds. They knew what they was going to do. They just had to be okay with saying what they were saying. That's my take on it. I don't really know if that was it. Now, October 20th, 1995, Judge Murillo finally sentenced Antoinette Frank to death by lethal injection for each of the three murders. If the sentences were carried out, she would become the first woman executed by Louisiana since 1942. Okay? Prosecutor Glenwood said it would have been a mockery of justice if Antoinette walked away without receiving the death penalty. So now we have a woman rejected by a psychiatrist, hired by the police department anyway, convicted of murdering three people, and now she's sentenced to die. You think this would a story would settle, okay, into appeals and legal filings? Because 20 days. 20 days went by. Mm, mm, mm. 20 days went by after she was sentenced, and an 11-year-old boyfriend was standing near the house where she used to live, and a dog bought him a bone. And I don't mean like, how we be being shady and being like the bone carrier. No, he was a bone carrier, but a real live human bone friend. Now imagine being 11 years old, minding your business. Your 11-year-old business playing as an 11-year-old, and here comes somebody's dog with a bone that was not from PetSmart. Baby, go get a grown up. In fact, go get every grown up you can find. Because wait, where did this even come from? Friend, police searched beneath the house and discovered human remains buried in a shallow grave. And then when I tell you this one took a turn, baby, okay? NOPD Sergeant Marlon DeFilio said investigators recovered a skull and several other body parts. Some of the human remains reportedly been placed inside paper bags. The New Orleans parish coroner, Dr. Frank Maynard, said it was evident that somebody had made considerable effort to bury the person. If you don't bury somebody, why you bury them in your backyard? Under your house. Why you bury it under anywhere near where you live? I guess you felt like it wasn't nobody ever gonna find it, but that dog was like, uh-uh, left the bone out for me. I ain't got no sense. So only about half of the skeleton was able to be recovered for I ain't got no sense at all. I know, Imma get it together. Now, at first, investigators could not determine whether the remains belonged to a man or a woman, but part of the right side of the skull was missing. The condition of the remains made it impossible to say what caused the damage. It could have been blunt force trauma, it could have been a gunshot, it could have just happened because the animal activity after the person was buried. We have no idea. We cannot turn damage to the skull into a confirmed cause of death, but the remains were sent to Louisiana State University for examination. And this is when investigators began looking at Antoinette's father, Adam Frank Sr. And that possibility, friend, really took hold of the story because, of course, it did. A body found underneath a convicted murderer's former home. Her father was missing, and the estimated age of the person may have been similar to his. Those are the pieces that look like they belong in the same box, all right? But look, looking like they fit is not the same as proving that they do. No positive identification was ever publicly announced. Now, the remains were never publicly identified as Mr. Adam Frank Sr., but one account reported that experts believe the remains belonged to a man around the same age as Antoinette's father. They didn't have a DNA match, they didn't have dental record identification, and it's not the coroner standing before the public saying, yo, we know exactly who this is, okay? Now, Roger Lacaze later reportedly wrote from prison that Antoinette had killed her daddy and buried him beneath the house. Sir, you were also sitting on death row for 3 murders connected to this woman, so your little prison correspondence is not the final report from the medical examiner's office. And all this time, you possibly knew something and you didn't say nothing to nobody. You didn't even use that to be like, if because you went in there already snitching on her. So why you ain't just said about the daddy and maybe cut out some of your time? See, just why I wouldn't be able to go to prison. It would make no sense at all. I couldn't do it. Get somebody else to do it. Now, could he have also been angry and deflecting and bargaining and repeating a rumor or simply saying whatever he wanted to say about his co-defendant? Absolutely. Possibly. All right. I cannot tell you which one it is. Now there's also no claim that said that it was there. Right? So later there is a published claim that says Antoinette refused to provide DNA for comparison to that body that I did find in one account, but really couldn't corroborate it anywhere else. Um, Now this is where I started looking at the investigators frame because I really understand why people suspected that the remains might be her father's. And I understand that why the theory has followed her name ever since. But what I do not understand is how unidentified remains can be recovered from beneath the house and apparently remain unidentified for decades. It wasn't as I was, like, reading this and looking at this story, it wasn't making sense to me, but then I realized, right, like, we had to eventually get to this stuff, and in 2005, retrospective, right, said authorities had made no serious effort to identify the person, and that case remained under investigation. That was 10 years after the discovery. So what happened? Were usable DNA samples ever developed? Were they compared against Antoinette's relatives? Were dental records for him ever located? Was he ever officially reported missing? Because remember, he was a veteran. So what happened with the VA? Like, what? I got a lot of questions. I got a lot of questions. All right. And this is why these shortcuts really bother me. All right. Everybody became so interested in whether or not Antoinette killed her father that the unidentified person under the house almost disappeared from their own story. Whoever it was still had a name, was still a person. Um, Even if that was her daddy. Like it just became about the fact that these bones were found under her house, right? Um, the remains were in a shallow grave, and some of them were reportedly again in paper bags. And no charges were ever filed in connection with the death of the person under the house. Now, when you hear someone say, as a fact, Antoinette murdered her father and buried him beneath the house, it's a theory, friend. I'm telling you that it's a theory. It still hasn't been proven. Even though in our gut right now, as we talking this out, that shit only makes sense. Now, honestly, that unresolved ending is disturbing enough, but we will just keep pushing, okay? But while the unidentified person was being left behind with a question mark, the murders of Kim On were forcing New Orleans to really confront a question it couldn't avoid any longer. Because how the hell did Antoinette Frank become a police officer in the first damn place? Back to that question, okay? And more importantly, what did NOPD change after three people paid for its failure to answer that question before handing this lady a badge? Now, things that did change after her, after all of that, NOPD finally decided it was time to revisit how it was hiring people because it was in shambles. Now imagine that. Not the psychiatrist writing that she shouldn't be suitable for the police department. Now when the police department lost portions of her psychological evaluation, not when they was out here firing police officers for cocaine protection operations and ordering the hire of somebody's murder. No, that it wasn't none of them times. But Richard Pennington became NOPD superintendent October 1994, about 5 months before the murder of these people at Cam On's. Now, he reportedly went to the restaurant itself on the night Ronnie Ha and Kwong were killed, so Pennington did not inherit this case from distance. He already knew. He saw what the department's failures looked like up close, and Antoinette Frank was responsible for the choices of Antoinette Frank only, okay? A bad hire did not, um did not pull the trigger. The missing evaluation did not murder 3 people. This lady still did that on her own. But NOPD did give police authority a uniform and institutional credibility to someone in its own screening process, okay? And someone was like, "Don't hire them." Because the department, did not merely overlook a vague concern. The examining psychiatrist had to reach a direct conclusion that she was not suitable for this. Now, friend, how much clearer did he need to make it? Did y'all need him to put it in all caps, highlight it in yellow, add a little red flag sticker to the folder? Like, what was going, hooty hoo, like bird call something? The records were incomplete, the process was inconsistent, and then somewhere inside that confusion, she just kept going, okay? So after the murders, Pennington began overhauling the entire department, and it was like, "Nah, all y'all gotta get the fuck. All y'all gotta get the fuck, okay?" Now, NOPD tightened its hiring standards and reportedly began excluding applicants with criminal records and serious credit problems. Now they changed their gift giving restrictions, and the department also changed rules involving officers' off-duty employment. And that off-duty employment piece mattered because Kim On was not an official police assignment. Ronnie's work detail um, had him there, but it wasn't official. Antoinette had worked there too, and that private job placed armed officers, their police relationships, and their personal connections inside that family-owned restaurant after hours. For in real time. Now, under Pennington, officers were prohibited from working certain security details at bars and strip clubs, and the goal was to limit the conflict, corruption, and questionable relationships that had been allowed to grow around private employment. He came in and was like, "Nah, ain't none of y'all doing that. Put this gavel down." Bam. Um, so when officers began to see this, it meant that they could carry public authority into private businesses with weak supervisions. Um, they could do that no more. They could do that no more. They had to have some real defined lines. All right. NOPD and Pennington was like, we've had enough. That's how I imagine they sound, right? Pennington actually. was, like, so fed up, he ultimately fired more than 100 officers during his roughly 8 years as superintendent. He was like, "I ain't playing with y'all. I'm not playing with y'all at all." Alright? He walked in that building and turned on them fluorescent lights and realized the whole place needed remediation. Um They were struggling with the corruption, the weak oversight, and everything, and that department was actually under national scrutiny. Officers have been accused and convicted of serious crimes, and while NOPD was trying to present itself as an institution capable of protecting New Orleans, some of the people wearing the badges were helping to create the danger. All right. Antoinette became the most infamous example of this, but she was not the entire problem. And this is where we got to resist the convenient version because it says a disturbed woman somehow slipped through the cracks. No, ma'am. She did not slip through anything. She's evaluated and walks right through the door. Okay. And somebody left the door open for her to walk through. So everybody can't act surprised when the consequences came through that door with her. All right. The reform that followed were necessary, but they also proved that NOPD understood that they had some failures worth correcting because you don't overhaul standards or hiring standards because everything works properly. You overhaul them because the shit ain't working. Now, Antoinette knew right from wrong. She understood police procedures well enough to return to Kim On in a patrol car and perform concern for the survivors and start to investigate home case. She knew enough to hide Ronnie's body, move evidence, and initially lie to investigators. The department failed to stop her from becoming an officer. Accountability is not a single serving meal. There's just enough to put some on everybody's plate. All right. All of the above. Annette for the murders, Lucas for the participation, NOPD for hand holding authority to someone it had already been warned about. And I'm not going to stop saying it because they were warned about this lady. Now, the department definitely changed, as we saw with Pennington, for the better after this. But those reforms definitely came a little too late. Now, my question is why institutional common sense so often shows up after the people died? Like, it all makes sense. It all makes sense. Because why does a warning become important only after the exact danger it warned about has already happened? And how many people are expected to absorb the consequences while the institution learns a lesson it already had in writing? All right. Antoinette's conviction and death sentence were in place, but the Lacaze case was not about to travel the same road forever. No move longer. Because Fred, I know, listen, this was a real long one. This was a good story. And it's got some twists and turns, okay? Because later, some years later, Lacaze he was on a different path. The state admitted that one of the officers involved in his case had failed to disclose a relationship that created a serious problem. And once that came out, the case, mm, that man, the man a jury had sentenced to death in 79 minutes was headed back to court. All right. And same murders, same courtroom, same original punishment. He was 18 years old when Ronnie Ha and Kwang were murdered. All right. IQ again reported in the low 70s for him, and his attorneys would later argue that he functioned more like a juvenile than an adult. But legally, he was an adult when the crimes happened. And that distinction matters because every time his lawyers tried to use his age and his intellectual functioning, it was to challenge his sentence. All right. His conviction and death sentence were upheld in a direct appeal in 2002. But his attorneys kept digging into the trial, and what they found inside the jury deserves a quick minute of our attention, friend. Because apparently, quote unquote, tell us if you have any ties to law enforcement was being treated like an optional icebreaker. Okay. One of the jurors identified in court as Mr. Settle had been a Louisiana state trooper. He had also worked as a railroad police officer, and he did not disclose that background during jury selection. At the time, a commissioned law enforcement officer was not legally permitted to serve on the jury. Now, add the context. One of the victims was an NLPD officer, the other defendant was an NLPD officer, and sitting among the people deciding whether Roger Lacaze was found guilty was someone with an undisclosed law enforcement career. Friend, that was not a tiny biogeographical detail he forgot to mention. That was the whole damn biography for the purpose of this next trial. And Mr. Settle was not the only juror whose undisclosed connections raised some questions. Another juror reportedly worked as an NOPD dispatcher and had been on duty when the call about Kim murders came in. Because they should have moved this shit out of New Orleans to begin with. That judge knew what was happening. But she also was married to an NOP officer, knew some of the police witnesses, and had attended Ronnie Williams' funeral. Baby, talk about he finna get a retrial. Mm. A third juror had reportedly been the victim, though, friend, of a violent crime, but did not disclose it, despite being asked about connections to crime victims. Now, none of those facts automatically prove how any of them voted, but that's the exact kind of bias and the reason why jurors are questioned before trial. Attorneys are supposed to receive enough truthful information to determine whether someone can evaluate the evidence fairly. And you can't make an informed decision with information a juror decided to keep tucked in their purse. Now, in July 2015, retired Judge Michael Kirby reviewed Rogers' post conviction claims and said the evidence of Rogers' guilt was overwhelming. Okay, write it on your sticky note, friend. This judge was not declaring that he was innocent, but Kirby also concluded that placing Mr. Settle on the jury created what he called a structural defect. In plain English, the problem went so deeply into the fairness of the trial that Kirby did not believe it could be patched into an apology. And a footnote, he threw out Rogers' conviction and death sentences and ordered a new trial. And I know, friend, what you finna ask. I know what you finna ask. If the evidence was so overwhelming, why give him another trial? Because the strength of the evidence does not give the court permission to disregard the rules, friend. Case in point, Carmelo Anthony. But that is the point that the people tend to lose when they believe that somebody's guilty, okay? A fair trial is not a prize reserved for defendants we like or dislike. If the Constitution only applies when the accused person is sympathetic, then it's not a constitutional right. It's a popularity contest. And baby, that is not jurisprudence. But I'm no lawyer. That's just Facebook court. That's what we're gonna go with. Now, Kirby also found serious problems with the work Rogers' original attorney had done during the penalty phase. The attorney had not adequately investigated Rogers' childhood, intellectual limitations, mental health, or other mitigating evidence, right? Before the jury decided whether he should die. So both the jury issue and the defense handling of the death penalty phase were now under scrutiny. But Rogers did not immediately receive a new trial. The state appealed Kirby's ruling, and in January of 2016, a three-judge panel from Louisiana's Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal reversed the order. Judges Edwin Lombard, Paul Bonin, and Madeline Landreau concluded that seating Mr. Settle was not the kind of structural error that automatically entitled the cause to start over. So the conviction came back, the new trial disappeared, and the courts continued fighting over whether the concealed information, the handling of the jury, and the judge's own undisclosed issues had denied Rogers a fair proceeding. Oh, yes. Okay. The judge had an issue too, because why would this file contain one clean complication when it can give us four complications in the trench code? Judge Frank Marullo, who presided over Rogers' trial, had reportedly signed an order authorizing the release of two guns from the NOPD evidence room. One of the weapons later reached Antoinette and became connected to the Kim on murders, friend. Hot diggity dog. Marullo denied signing the order and reportedly suggested that his signature may have been forged, though. Investigators wanted handwriting samples from him. He did not provide them while he was presiding over this case, over Roger Lacaze's new case. And Lacaze's defense was not given the full opportunity to address that possible conflict before the trial. Now, I'm not saying Judge Murillo knowingly released the murder weapon. Make it make sense however you make it make sense, right? But I'm just saying there was some dispute involved over his signature, especially since he said his signature was forged, because why would you not just give them your signature if you gonna say it's forged? So, again, Make it make sense however you make it make sense for you, friend. Now, the defense did not know enough about it to decide whether to ask that he step aside and recuse himself. So in 2017, the United States Supreme Court told Louisiana to take another look at Rogers' judicial bias claim under a newer decision involving when a judge's possible conflict becomes constitutionally intolerable. That still did not erase Rogers' convictions, Lacaze's convictions, but it did keep the pressure on the state to address how the trial had been handled. And eventually, Lacaze's death sentence was set aside because his trial attorney had failed to properly investigate and present mitigating evidence. The New Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office chose not to seek the death penalty again. So on December 2019, Lacaze was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 3 life sentences, and he remains incarcerated at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. His attorney asked the court to reconsider the no parole portion, arguing that Rogers had the mental function of a juvenile when the murders occurred, and the judge denied that request. So let's be clear about the outcome. He was not exonerated. His convictions were not erased. He was not released, and the court did not declare that he had nothing to do with the murders. His punishment changed from death to life without the possibility of parole. Okay. Because significant constitutional and legal problems were found in how his original case was being handled. Now, Rogers went from waiting to be executed to knowing he would just die in prison. Like this his new home permanently for the rest of his life. He wasn't gonna die early. He just gonna sleep there until he died. And yes, the 18-year-old civilian received a life sentence. The trained police officer remained sentenced to death, but we cannot compare the sentences without remembering that each jury believed about their roles, okay? Antoinette had training and authority and inside knowledge of Kim On and a personal relationship with the victims. She also admitted to shooting Ronnie, though she claimed the kids forced her to shoot Ha and Kwang, okay? The kids has continued to deny pulling the trigger. His mother has maintained that he is innocent, and attorneys have raised alternative theories, including a claim that Antoinette's brother, Adam Frank Jr., may have been the second person inside the restaurant. And Adam was eventually brought in from Angola to testify during a later hearing, and he did not participate in the marriage because remember he had went to jail too at some point. Um, but the theory was never proven. So once again, it belongs under the defense argued, not this is what actually happened. So documented, the bottom line is that the two juries convicted Antoinette and Lacaze of the same 3 murders. Um, both were sentenced to death, but Rogers ultimately was challenging the way his punishment was reached, and so then he just got life in prison with no parole. So Antoinette, her sentence stayed in place, and she spent years, okay, trying to do what Rogers has managed to do. Not necessarily erase the convictions, but she was like, I really don't want to die. At least let me die in prison. So she's been trying to fight that process and convince the court to allow her to just get life in prison. All right. And it's been going on now for more than 30 years, friend. And it's still not over. Okay. So where does Antoinette, I keep calling her Annette. I don't know why I want this lady name to be Annette, but anytime I say Antoinette, just know I meant, anytime I say Annette, friend, just know I meant Antoinette. I'm going to call her Frank. Frank. So where does Antoinette Frank's case stand right now, friend? She has not been granted a new trial. Her convictions have not been overturned. Her death sentence has not been vacated, and she's not about to walk out of prison. But what is happening right now is a fight over whether some of her post-conviction claims will ever be considered on their merits. And yes, that sounds very technical because it is. But once we take the legal seasoning off of it, the question is fairly simple. Did Antoinette wait so long to add certain claims that the state can no longer fairly respond to them? To understand how we got there, we got to go back a little bit. So in 2001, the Louisiana Supreme Court upheld her 3 murder convictions, but it found a problem with the way the trial court handled her request for state-funded expert assistance during the penalty phase. Remember, she didn't get a mental health expert to testify before the jury that sentenced her to death. The trial court, had never formally determined whether she was indignant, meaning unable to pay for the expert assistant herself. So the Louisiana Supreme Court set that part of the case back for hearing. Not a new trial, not an acquittal, but a hearing to access expert help during the sentence. During the process, the court learned that Antoinette originally had the attorney Robert Jenkins, who actually retained the psychologist Dr. Mark Zimmerman in 1995, and Zimmerman went to meet with her, but Antoinette refused to speak with him without her attorney present. And here's the part that would divide the court because her attorney did not return with Zimmerman for another interview. So Antoinette knowingly rejected expert assistance. Or was she just saying, I'll speak with him when my lawyer is in the room? And then nobody completed the next step. It's not the same thing, and that's what the Louisiana, court was looking at, okay? So in May 2007, the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled 5-2 that Antoinette had been given access to an expert and voluntarily refused to cooperate. The majority upheld her death sentence. Chief Justice Pascal Calagero disagreed. He argued that Antoinette had not knowingly rejected expert help simply because she asked for her attorney to be present. The dissent would have given her a new penalty phase, not a new guilt trial, a new hearing where another jury would decide whether or not she would receive life or death after hearing evidence the original jury never heard. But the dissent did not control the ruling. The death sentence stayed, and in 2008, the United States Supreme Court declined to hear the case that made her conviction and sentences final for purposes of the ordinary appeals process. And then the state began trying to set execution dates. So in April 2008, Judge Frank Marullo signed a warrant scheduling her execution for July 15th. In September, Marullo signed another warrant setting the execution for December 8th. Both of them had been stopped, right? So, Antoinette, her attorney said, "Hold on, because why is Judge Murillo still handling this case?" Because by that point, questions had surfaced about his possible connections to the paperwork authorizing the release, remember, of the weapon? And then he was like, "My signature was forged." The exact facts surrounding that signature remained disputed, but the conflict question was serious enough to create years of litigation over whether he should stay on his case, okay? One judge ruled that Murillo did not have to step aside. Another judge was like, yeah, he do. So even the courts could not immediately agree on whether the judge who presided over the trial and signed 2 death warrants should continue handling Antoinette's post-conviction proceedings. This file has never met a complication it did not invite inside and offer a beverage, baby. Because I tell you, this got more twists than General Hospital, damn it. Yes, I still watch General Hospital. But, um, so now we're gonna move into the post-conviction case, and this is different from the direct appeal. Friend, the direct appeal asks a higher court to review what happened at the trial, and the post-conviction proceeding allows a prisoner to raise certain constitutional problems that may require evidence from outside the original trial. Things like ineffective assistance of counsel, undisclosed evidence, or information a jury never heard. Antoinette filed an initial application on 2008, and in July 2009, her attorneys supplemented it with 18 claims. Then the case set inside years of litigation, court changes, filings, dispute, delays, all that a legal movement without no final resolution. So in 2023, Annette asked for clemency. Outgoing Governor John Bell Edwards had publicly opposed the death penalty, and dozens of Louisiana death row prisoners sought hearings before he left office. 50 anti gender violence organizations and advocates supported commuting Antoinette's sentence to life without parole. Their argument was that the original jury never heard the evidence of severe physical and sexual abuse Antoinette allegedly endured from her father, or how that trauma may have affected her relationship with Laquez. Let me place the boundary right here. The abuse claims were presented by Antoinette's current legal team and supporting experts. They were not established on her 95 trial. We're going to discuss the evidence behind them, but I'm not retroactively placing testimony into courtroom where it was never heard, okay? So on October 13, 2023, the Louisiana Board of Pardons split 2 and 2 on whether Antoinette should be receiving clemency, right? A tie meant the request failed, so the board did not hear the full clemency case, and Governor Edwards never received a recommendation to commute her sentence. Then on July 2024, Antoinette's attorney added 6 more claims to her existing post conviction application. Among other things, they argued that jurors never received critical evidence about her trauma, mental health, relationship with Rogers, and they also relied on evidence developed during Rogers' later proceedings that they say supported Antoinette's original claim that he coerced her into their murders. Mm, 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 mm. Lord have mercy, I done forgot I got this new chair from my honey and forgot the back go all the way down. Baby, I just scared the shit out of myself. Mhm. So now, her legal team's position, right, was that Annette's claim since her recorded statement in 95 that Laquez shot Ronnie and forced her to shoot Hong and Kwang at gunpoint. The prosecution disputes that version, and the jury rejected her defense when it convicted her of all 3 murders. A claim does not become newly proven because it survives long enough to enter another filing. The state objected. The new claims was like, no. Do not pass go, don't collect $200. Take your ass to jail. Stay there. Now, Attorney General Liz Muriel argued that 15 years had passed between the 2009 filing and the 2024 supplement. During that time, witnesses have died, memories have faded, evidence was lost, and records were destroyed. According to the state, that delay damaged its ability to defend the convictions against the newly added allegations. And Judge Kamaya Holmes initially rejected the state's procedural objection in May 2025. She treated the 2024 filing as a supplement to the timely application already pending, not as a brand new application filed too late. So the state was like, can we have a separate hearing on whether the delay had materially um, prejudiced its case? Prejudiced its case. Prejudice. Eh. Judge Holmes was like, "Nah, homie, we good." So the state took the issue to the Supreme Court, Louisiana Supreme Court, that is. And on March 31st, 2026, friend, the court unanimously ruled that Judge Holmes should have held the requested hearing before rejecting the state's material prejudice argument. And friend, that's the ruling that got chopped up online and served as Antoinette Frank may be getting a new trial. No, that is not what the court said. The Louisiana Supreme Court did not rule her claims were true. It didn't overturn a conviction. And it did not order a new trial to reconsider whether she was guilty. It ordered one limited hearing, a hearing that happened June 3rd, 2026. The issue was whether the 15-year delay materially harmed the state's ability to respond to the claims Antoinette added in 2024. That's it. That's it. So the question at this stage is whether the court will even reach those arguments. Think of it like this. Her attorneys are standing outside a courtroom with 6 additional claims, and the state is saying, "You waited too long. We can't hear we can't do that. We can no longer properly defend against these because what we need ain't there no more." And so before anybody opens the door and examines whether or not the claims have merit, the judge has to decide whether the delay itself keeps them out of the courtroom, okay? Under Louisiana law, if the state proves that events outside its control have materially damaged its ability to respond, the affected claims must be dismissed. That means the court may never decide whether those particular claims are factually or legally persuasive. They will be dismissed because the delay made a fair response impossible. If the state does not prove material prejudice, Antoinette still does not automatically win. Getting through the door is not the same as winning the case when you enter the room. It would only mean the litigation can move forward to the next steps. And Judge Holmes is expected to rule on the material prejudice issue on October 9th, 2026. So as I'm recording this on August, we do not have a decision yet. So looks like I'll put a sticky note next to this so I could give y'all a quick little update in October when I come back from hiatus. Okay. But and don't fret for it. Remember, I said you got a couple more episodes before I go on hiatus. Calm down. I know. I know. But feel free to check on me. Now, as of tonight, Antoinette remains convicted of all 3 murders. Her death sentence remained in effect, and there is no scheduled execution date. And she remains incarcerated at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, the only woman currently serving on Louisiana's death row. The live issue is not whether she's the live issue is not whether she's innocent, but it's whether she deserves a new penalty hearing. The issue is whether the state has been so prejudiced by the delay that some of her newest claims must be dismissed before their substance is considered. Now, it may sound like 30 years of paperwork arguing about more paperwork, but procedures matters, especially in death penalty cases. The state is asking for permission to execute someone, and the court got to be meticulous about that. Painfully and annoyingly meticulous. There is no my bad after you execute somebody. You can't just bring them back. So they got to make sure they cover all their bases, right? And at the same time, the victim families have been living with this case since 1995. Every new filing, all of that, okay? Every new hearing, every headline suggesting something may change. They reliving this. Now, Antoinette might lose these claims on a procedural issue. She may clear that hurdle and still lose when the court examines their merit, or the court could eventually just find a constitutional problem serious enough to change her sentence or conviction. Right now, none of the outcomes have happened, and that's where we at. That's just where we at. So, we need to talk about Antoinette's mental health because I said that quite a bit in these, and I think it's worth talking about. And before somebody go ahead and diagnose her through the television screen and this podcast, radio, or whatever app you're listening to, let's really establish some boundaries, okay? A person can have trauma, and we're gonna establish boundaries because I'm a psychology major. That's not ish, all right? So a person can really still have trauma and still be responsible for harming other people. Two things can be true at once. That's what we do know. And a person can also be responsible for a terrible act that and still have history the jury should have heard before deciding whether or not the state should kill her. They do not cancel each other out. But at Antoinette's original trial, the jury heard no testimony from a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a mitigation specialist. Nothing about her history, nothing about her mental, nothing at all that might explain the behavior, emotional functioning, or the relationship with the kids. First of all, her lawyer did retain that Dr. Zimmerman, right? But she was like, I need my lawyer to be in here with us, and nobody ever followed up. So in all of this, her refusals, they matter. Okay. It sucks to have to say, but I'm not gonna remove her agency because the defense had a job to do too. All right. Capital defense is supposed to include an independent investigation into mitigation, and the attorney cannot simply wait for the client to identify every piece of trauma herself, especially when the very same issue affects her ability or willingness to discuss it. Right? Now, she definitely needs some help and some mental fortitude. I don't even know if that's what mm. But years after her child, multiple mental health professionals did evaluate her, okay? They did evaluate her. And this it sounds like the beginning of a major courtroom battle over her diagnosis. But the court ultimately did not have to decide which clinical interpretation was correct. The legal question was narrower. Had Antoinette been denied access to an expert, or had she been offered an expert and refused to cooperate? We found out that answer. They was like she didn't refuse to cooperate. She asked for her lawyer, and y'all didn't follow through. So we went through her background. We went through her history. We went through all of that stuff, right? Um, There was a lot of twists and turns, and this story leaves me speechless at the end of it, unequivocally speechless at the end of it, okay? But here is what I think. I don't think this is about a woman who snapped. Everything here says that she was patient. She should have a straight jacket, hugging herself, allowing her to just love on herself 24/7. Mm, but that's where we at. Sergeant Rance was like, she specifically went back to finish what she started. That's what he was saying, and I'm not inclined to disagree with that man. Not at all, right? Either way, she stood in front of these grieving people and traumatized survivors and asked them what happened. Like, straight jacket. So, friend, the system's failure in this story, Antoinette's own issues. It's not a footnote. That's my side eye. I know this was a long one, absolutely long one, but you absolutely deserved it for the way I've been treating you, friend. I found it, I read it, and now I'm telling you, friend, you gotta make it make sense for you. And listen, friend, before I go, don't let nobody play in your face. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember to side eye responsibly. Oh, and please protect your peace and your energy. And listen, pull up on me, leave some comments. The Side Eye Files on TikTok and Instagram, and then the Side Eye Files podcast on YouTube. The Side Eye Files at Gmail on if you want to send me an email. All right, listen, I'm nosy. I be wanting to know what y'all know because sometimes I miss stuff. My head be in the books. Literally, I got a book from the library for this dissertation. So keep me up to date. All right, listen, stay nosy, friend. I'm finna head out. I will definitely see you next Wednesday. And I promise to try to get you an episode before Wednesday. I'm out.